Thank you for taking the time to watch this. It was a very difficult but very important experience that we had last year, and we wanted to share a little bit about it and about the human face of some of the facts and figures and policy implications that we just heard by the panelists.
Right, so now it works, I think. Yeah. So this is a film that I have wanted to make for a long time. I have worked as a journalist covering the Syrian civil war, and I always felt that we were kind of putting words in other people's mouth. We were talking about their experience that we hadn't experienced, as if we were the experts. So in, what was it, June 2016, Jasmine and I packed a small camera and some sound equipment, and we went to Greece, where we met this little boy living in a tent on a gas station. That's where he spent his childhood years. Menwar, who is 6 years old, and his family fled the Syrian civil war 4 months prior to us meeting him, hoping to find peace and a new life in Europe. But when they came to Europe, they found a Europe that didn't want them, a Europe that had closed their borders. And so now the family is sitting by the borders, hoping for a solution, and just waiting, counting the days, seeing their lives pass them. While we were in the camp was actually cleared. The police came to take them away. So this little family, who is hoping to be able to just start life again, just a normal everyday life, they were faced by the decision of whether they were to give up their dream about Germany and a new normal life, and to follow the police to these, what they called prison-like camps, or cross the border illegally. So this is Menwar's story. This is the true story about the civil war in Syria. Menwar is the true face of this. It's not the rebels. It's not the bombs. It's not ISIS or the army or the ghost cities. It's the victims of war. And who are more a victim of war than the children? They are the ones who are being pulled into this completely against their will. They are the ones who get their lives completely turned upside down. They are the ones who take Europe's rejection personally, and they are the ones who learn about the world through warfare.
You know, Ida and I met last year for the first time, but we actually couldn't have known that 3 years earlier we were both working on the Syria crisis in very different capacities. So I was working at the Department of Defense as the country director for Syria, and I actually worked for Ambassador Refugee for a couple of years. And Ida was working as a journalist covering the Syria crisis for
Not MTV, but
MTV, TV2, TV2. And so through our different capacities, we had become very familiar with the Syria crisis and the numbers and the facts. We knew that there were about last year 4.8 million registered refugees in the neighboring countries alone, half of them children. That in the Med, 360,000 people in 2016 had tried to cross over into Europe via sea, by the water. 5,500 arrivals in 2017 alone. This year, in the last month, 300 of those dead or missing at the moment, a quarter of them children. So we knew the numbers and we knew the facts, but I don't think anything could have actually prepared us for the human experience and the human side of the story. And I want to turn it over to you to maybe tell a very quick story about what we saw there.
Right. Yeah. So as journalist, no, as Jasmine touches upon, my background is in journalism, and I've worked covering this, read reports, TV stories, fact sheets, statistics. I'm supposed to be an expert on this, giving the stories to the people, educating the people. But there was nothing that could have prepared me for what we saw when we came down there. I just couldn't fathom that this was Europe 2016. The chaos, the lack of rule, all these children just scattered by the roadside, living in broken tents with flies everywhere. Europe in 2016. There's basically just random tents put up by the side of the road. You would think that it's more organized when you read about it in reports, people gathering facts, etc., but it's not. There's nobody there who was in charge of this camp. There's some volunteer organizations to pop by every now and then, but generally they are just left to fend for themselves. There's complete confusion, very much lack of information. The people don't know their rights. They don't know where they're going, where they can go. And in the middle of this, you know, you have the children living their lives, being pulled along into this, living in danger, on the run, scared, lost, thrown to the side, tossed around. And then on top of it all, they're just turned into a number, a statistic that represents problems and challenges. And the story I wanted to talk about is, it was at the very end, as you could see in this clip, at nightfall when the police came to gather all the refugees in this camp. The family we got to know, they packed up to leave. They wanted to cross the border illegally with human smugglers. And I'm holding a camera. So as the children that I've gotten to know are leaving and they're saying bye to me, I can't reply to them because you get my voice on the camera. So I'm just cold, just like the rest of the world, watching them, you know, run on to their next chapter. And so I turned off the camera and I ran after them into the field to you know, be able to say my final goodbye to them and wish them good luck. And I was able to catch up with the mother because the mother was actually pregnant going through all of this. So she was falling behind the others and she started crying and she told me, you have to leave. They will kill you if they catch you with a camera here. The smugglers will kill you. So I stood behind and I watched them run into the forest. And that's when it kind of happened to me. I wasn't a professional anymore. I wasn't a journalist there to cover, you know, the latest news story or make a film. I wasn't guarded. I became human. And I just broke down, started crying. And that's when Jasmine found me on this field in the dark. And she kind of collected me. And we were to return to our hotels where we could go to warm, good beds. While Menwar, a 6-year-old boy, is running alone with human smugglers in a dark forest with the police chasing him. We're going to go home to our beds and sleep safe.
Yeah, it was a really surreal experience after the incident that Ida just described, going back to the tents that they had left, and the moment that we kind of both broke down was seeing a tiny little shoe that had been left behind, and we knew it was his favorite shoe. It was like a Spider-Man shoe, and he didn't Superman, yes. And he didn't have time to collect it before he left, and it was really heartbreaking. But we only have a minute left, so I just finally wanted to say, because you talked about some of the implications of this refugee crisis and the migration crisis, and the three things that you mentioned that we saw in person was, one, just this completely lost generation, both of children and of adults that had given up hope for the future because, as one man told me, I'm 65 years old, I'm not going to start again. It is now all about my children. And this lost generation of children who had been languishing in these camps with no education, with no sort of skills to be able to use to integrate and contribute positively to whatever society they end up in. The other was this massive loss of identity that we were seeing unfold right before our eyes, where the longer they stayed there, and especially for the children, they just had no concept of why they were not being allowed into another country. In their case, it was Germany that they wanted to go to. And the longer they stayed there, the more that their identities that they had known, Syrian, Muslim, Arab, the more that became synonymous with dangerous, unwanted, unwelcome. And it was very clear that we were watching this process where people start to think of themselves as the other. And finally, related to that, we all know what happens when people start thinking of themselves as the other and being told that they're the other is that the risk of radicalization and the risk of terrorism just exponentially increases, not because these children were particularly wired to become little terrorists just because they were in a refugee camp, but because refugees and terrorists thrive on chaos and uncertainty and hopelessness and loss of identity. And that is what we saw unfolding before our eyes and what was so difficult to see. So ironically, it struck us that by closing its borders to try to keep these problems out, these European countries were inadvertently creating those problems that we are all, in our different capacities, going to have to deal with for many, many years forward. Thank you. Thanks.